Warlord Grom, known more famously as Grom the Paunch, or Grom the Fat of the Misty Mountains, was not only the largest and most powerful goblin to have ever lived, but also among the greatest greenskin war bosses, being the only greenskin warlord to have ever made a successful invasion on the distant lands of Ulthuan. Goblins are cowardly and disloyal, but nothing stirs their wicked hearts like Grom, the mightiest of goblin war bosses. Stories of Grom's greatness still command attention to any goblin around a camp, and if a shaman should conjure his superlative-sized image, even the most boisterous gobble will behave with reverence. In Grom's looming presence, goblins will stand up straight, refrain from grumbling backtalk, and even limit their rampant nose-picking. These ultimate displays of respect are because, to lowly goblins, Grom is a living god, an embodiment of everything that they will never be: large, ferocious, and idolized. All war bosses are full of themselves and boastful, but once again, Grom displayed his epic proportions. Here was a goblin from a backwards tribe grown large and powerful, suddenly able to bully orcs and command as he saw fit. It was no wonder it went to his head. Soon after, he crushed an opposing leader beneath his bulk and added the night goblins of Thunder Mountain to his growing forces. Grom began to refer to himself in the third person. If they wanted to stay in his favor, Grom's followers had to use phrases such as "your immensity" in addressing him. Both Grom and his horde grew larger still. Grom's meteoric rise began when, as a young boss of the Broken Axe tribe, he consumed a portion of raw troll. As troll flesh regenerates, and Grom always a big eater, he had not stopped to cook the meal. The foul meat writhed in his belly. The race to regrow, against the race to digest, was on. A lesser goblin would have burst asunder, but Grom was made of sterner stuff. The Battle of the Belly, as the deed came to be known, changed Grom. He grew to prodigious size. It is said that on that day, Grom saw the last of his legs. Yet so huge and powerful had Grom grown that he no longer needed to see them, and could instead order others to see his legs for him. So Grom's legend began. He quickly rose to the warlord of the Broken Axe tribe, and spent many happy years plundering the Wolflands, the Badlands, and the southern World's Edge Mountains. By this time, Grom had taken to fighting atop a chariot that suited his grandiose proportions. Many goblins traveled far to see De Greaton and join his exploits. At its peak, Grom's Waaagh contained hundreds of different tribes. Grom carved his name large in the psyches of men, dwarves, and elves, in whose realms it is still feared and cursed. Even now, rumors sweep the Badlands that his corpulent majesty has returned and is once again amassing an army to launch a new invasion. Within a year of the troll-eating incident, Grom was already large and in charge of the Broken Axe tribe. The tribe had grown considerably, but had yet to test their strength against the most formidable power of the region, Zoc Gutstabba, orc warboss of the Gutstabba tribe. Zoc and his orcs had recently conquered the night goblins that lived in the Thunder Mountain. Many of the Broken Axe goblins felt that they should run from the larger orcs and submit to their rule. Grom, however, had other ideas. Grom set out alone, his axe slung over his mighty shoulder. When word reached Zoc, the orc demanded that the Goblin King be allowed to journey without ambush. He would teach the slumpy gobble a lesson himself. When the goblin made it to Gutstabba camp, he found Zoc waiting for him, already encircling him with a ring of bloodthirsty onlookers. Grom's size was impressive. He was less muscled than Zoc, but far larger in girth. The battle was short and brutal. Zoc landed a blow with his cleaver, but before everyone's eyes, the gaping wound healed itself. Zoc's dismemberment did not. Grom's takeover bid for the Gutstabba tribe was only resolved after he slew every orc big boss in the tribe. Grom was so exhausted, he sat his bulk down directly on top of a diminutive night goblin. All expected to find just a black cowl and an oozy stain beneath Grom's mass. But the night goblin not only survived, he sprang forth with a maniacal grin on his face. Taking this great fortune as a sign from Mork, Grom instantly promoted the lucky night goblin to carry his standard. In the year 2410, Grom, now a hulking massive goblin with a huge and unnatural belly, led his horde through the Blackfire Pass and northwards along the dwarf-held highlands. He brought several dwarf holds to ruin, desecrated tombs of dwarf ancestors, and ordered a colossal statue of the dwarf god Grungi to be hacked into his own, but not insubstantial image. Furious at this new outrage and poor level of craftsmanship, the dwarves gathered en masse to hew down the offending goblin warboss and his followers. The dwarves, led by King Bragoric, met Grom's Waaagh, and the Battle of the Iron Gate. After 3 days of non-stop fighting, the two sides retreated for some breathing space, leaving many dead, but no clear victor. For the dwarves, this result was nothing less than a disaster. Grom's rusty axe had reaped a grim tally of the king's best warriors, and with so many of their brethren dead, there could be no hope of driving the greenskins away. In desperation, the dwarves retreated to their various holds, and despite their pride, sent emissaries to the Empire seeking help. Grom the Fat had already replaced his losses from new tribes, particularly goblins flocked to him to join the corpulent leader. Unfortunately for the dwarves and the Empire, the reigning Emperor, Dieter IV, Elector Count of Stirland, and perhaps the most feckless and callow individual that ever sat upon the imperial throne, when the dwarf king messenger reached Dieter's golden palace of the then capital of Nuln, the emperor reacted immediately, but not by sending help, but by removing his entire court and moving further westwards to Altdorf in order to be as far as possible from the threat. Disgusted, the dwarf messenger returned to Karazakarik, where the king received news of the emperor's decision, with stoicism and a fresh entry into the Book of Grudges. Unable to contain Grom's ambitions without aid, the dwarves resolved once again to shut their stout doors and defend their holds from within. Grom's Waaagh rampaged through the mountains, but they were unable to take any major dwarf strongholds or bring the stunties out for battle. All the while, night goblins from as far away as Red Eye Mountain, as well as many goblins traveling from the Darklands, joined Grom's legions. Through Peak Pass came long lines of mobile shanty towns, caravans of swindling happy traders. Many of the lean wolf rider tribes came too. Hardened by their life of the Wolflands, they sought to put their banners beneath the larger-than-life, now legendary, Grom. As benefited both his massive status, as well as a ponderous frame, Grom began to travel everywhere aboard his especially sturdy chariot. From that point in history, Grom had essentially formed the largest and most powerful goblin horde to have ever terrorized the lands of men since the time of Sigmar Heldenhammer. A horde of whose numbers can literally flood the old world in a rushing green tide of violence and anarchy. Leading his host westwards, Grom devastated the Empire provinces of Stirland and Taladcland, and penetrated as far as Hawkland in the shadow of the Middle Mountains. Empire armies were met and defeated, and soon humans retreated to walled cities and towns. The countryside was abandoned. The Great Forest became, for a time, a goblin realm. Grom chose to bypass heavily fortified areas. Instead, the Waaagh lived off the land, leaving behind only burnt and well-picked-over ruins. There was one notable exception. Since Imperial hero Magnus the Pious had become emperor years before, the capital city of the Empire had been moved to Nuln. Recently, however, the city defenses had been badly neglected, in favor of Dieter's preference for marbled magnificence. Such a rich target could not be ignored, and Dieter's marvelous palace of gold and his great buildings and foundations were destroyed in the engulfing attack. For weeks, the cobblestone streets of Nuln rang to the sound of reckless chariot racing. To the frustration of the battle-minded Black Orc mobs that had joined the throng, Grom was content to rest upon his spoiled heaps. While popular with most of the troops, the lack of direction ensured that the ragtag army was widely dispersed, looting across wide tracts of the Empire. The mightiest of human nations was now little more than a collection of isolated communities huddling behind heavily defended walls, while Grom's hordes roamed and plundered at will. Forest goblins emerged to join the rampage, and spiders of vast proportions crept over palisades, and soon even walled towns were being plundered. The end of the Empire seemed inevitable, for during such times no land was tilled, nor crops sown. The Empire was too paralyzed with fear to raise an army and spend its days secure in Altdorf, dreaming of lissom maids and sprawling amid heaps of piles of gold coins. Only the desperate valor of Prince Wilhelm, cousin to Dieter, raised any hopes. While his army hastily raised militia could not hope to stand before Grom's assembled minions, the Greenskins were so divided across many provinces that it seemed possible to confront and beat many of these similar elements. Thus Wilhelm preserved the fertile fields of Reichland, breadbasket that would scour the starving nation, if only the Greenskins could be driven off. Despite the urgings of his Black Orc war bosses, Grom remained content to loll about atop mounds of looted goods. It was a trance prophecy from his shaman, Old Blacktooth, that rekindled Grom's fighting spirit. "Take to the sea," Blacktooth had said. "Gork and Mork want new lands to crush." In that hour, Grom turned from his lethargic spot to his old frantic self. Without waiting to regroup his scattered forces, Grom ordered all troops within bellowing distance to head westward. Even with only a portion of his dispersed forces, it was child's play for Grom to defeat any army of Middenland that marched out to meet him. As a chariot was destroyed by a cannonball in the Battle of the Blue-Clad Humans, Grom made a brief stop at the city of Middenheim. His new chariot was magnificent, made from the roof timbers of the Temple of the White Wolf of Middenheim. Grom, to no one's surprise, named his chariot the same as the last one, the Chariot of Grom. Such was Grom's haste to reach the coast that the city of Middenheim was left intact, save for a roofless temple, a ruined gate, and a lingering smell. After devastating large tracts of Nordland, Grom reached the coast and immediately ordered the tribes gathered in his wake to build a fleet. Acres of timber were cut down, while other tribes were sent to scavenge for supplies. The fleet was unlike anything seen before. Enormous hulks of crudely fashioned wood, propelled by tread wheels and patchy sails. In typical greenskin fashion, whatever materials were available were used, resulting in entire imperial watchtowers dismantled and rebuilt, in rather more slipshod style, upon decks of larger ships. Many war bosses, particularly Orc and Black Orc ones, protested that the boys should be deployed in battle, not sweating out shipbuilding. Grom slew enough protesters to quell the rest. Within several months, Grom set sail and made his way down the coast. Brave ships from the Imperial Navy shadowed the Greenskin fleet. The Admiral did not want to risk engaging the Greenskin armada, reckoning that time, tide, and naval ineptitude would do much of his work for him. As Grom's fleet sailed down the delta of the mighty Reich, heading into Marienburg, the Admiral realized he had no choice but to attack. It was a massive and bloody sea battle that sunk half of the Imperial fleet before the rest were driven off into the rising winds. Marienburg lay open to invasion, but as fortune would have it, the weather took a turn for the worse. Strong gales whipped up a rough sea, and at last the poor seamanship of the Orcs and Goblins caught up with them. Unable to reach safety, many vessels, each crammed with greenskins, sank unceremoniously, killing hundreds with each vessel sunk. The rest of the fleet was blown out to sea over the horizon. Although many of these shanty crafts were wrecked near Bretonnian shores, the rest of the fleet rode out the storm. After 40 nights at sea, Grom's much-reduced fleet made landfall upon the mist-covered coast. Keen-eyed shore patrols spotted the intruders and marveled at the greenskin horde that was disembarking onto the shingle beach. This was the east coast of Ulthuan, along the bleak coast of Yvresse. The high isles of that land had many magical protections to ward off strangers. Between the shifting sandbanks, mystical fogs, and innumerable sea monsters that prowled those waters, it was rare for a single ship to pass unimpeded. Now hundreds of ramshackle vessels showed evidence of powerful magics or luck beyond imagining. Grom's army was but a fraction of its previous titanic size, yet as they spread out upon the shores, it was still a mighty host. Many of the wolves had torn each other to bits on the voyage, yet the ones that emerged were well fed and were soon sent out to scout the new lands. A single wyvern survived being chained to the ship's damp and stinking hold, and it roared in anger as it was released, snapping and consuming goblins by the dozen. Only the shaman, Old Blacktooth, could tame the beast, and he claimed it was his personal mount. Grom ordered the ships destroyed and their beams made into war machines, and yet another chariot, for his old one was now at the bottom of the ocean. Grom knew that there was no going back. If this strange new land was what Gorka Mork wanted conquering, then he was the goblin to do it. The horrendously outnumbered High Elves could do little to stop Grom's rampage. Small elven armies contested river crossings and defended the towns, watchtowers, and elven mansions along the sparsely populated coast. Yet all were ransacked in turn. The greenskins cheered to see the delicate spires topple into ruin. Old Blacktooth felt strongly that the gleaming white watchstones that ring the island should be uprooted and destroyed. Grom ordered it so. Each of these magical monoliths had been carefully set to the ground and surrounded with spells of protection. Their job was to capture and drain the fell magics of the world that, like a whirlpool, were drawn swirling into Ulthuan. Over time, the loss of a single such stone could have dire consequences, and Grom's army had already wrecked many. The more standing stones the greenskins knocked down, the more menacing the swirling mists and multicolored lights that shone in the night skies became. Unbeknownst to the greenskins, each fallen stone empowered Blacktooth, until the old shaman was still bursting with strange new magical energies. Such raw, arcane power was driving him into madness. Still, the cackling shaman divined the direction of a large elf city and pointed the way. Grom ordered the army in that direction, and within days, Wolf Rider scouts reported the towering city on the horizon. Grom was eager for a battle worthy of his reputation, and he got his wish. The city in question was Tor Yvresse, an ancient elf metropolis whose glory, beauty, and aesthetics rivaled any ever created. Nestled into the mouth of the natural harbor, Tor Yvresse rested on the 9 hills that grew out of the fertile green plain, while behind the green-walled city rose the steep Anuli Mountains. Confident of victory over the numerous yet small and simple-minded barbarians, a formidable elf army marched out of Tor Yvresse to ensure no filthy goblinoids befouled their beloved homes. 10 leagues out from the elegant spires, the armies clashed. Grom ordered his infantry hordes forward to pin the pointy elf ears in place, while his dwindling wolf riders and wolf-drawn chariots circled to strike the glittering host from the rear. At first, many greenskins died on the swift-moving blades and spear points of the elven army, but Grom, surrounded by a sea of goblins, stood tall in his chariot and bellowed for his troops to hold. While his troops weren't doing much, Grom himself was a powerhouse. The scythed wheels of his chariots mowed down pointy ears like so much wheat. His mighty axe lopped off elf heads with every swing. When the howling greenskin flanking forces crashed home, the slaughter began. 3 days after the mopping up of the elf army on the fields, the greenskin siege machines were set in place to lob great boulders against the city walls. Meanwhile, the skies grew dark from the baleful effects of the destroyed elf waystones. The ground trembled, and at last, the elves realized their doom. If they could not soon repair the fallen stones, or worse, another single waystone fell, the very island of Ulthuan could tear itself apart. The goblin war machine spent day after day battering Tor Yvresse. The city was proud no more. Many spires were pulverized. Those that still stood were isolated. Elegant bridges, once connected them, were smashed or ablaze. Into this ruin, Grom ordered his final assault. Although his armies were no longer being replaced, the goblin hordes were more than enough to breach the poorly defended city walls and began leveling Tor Yvresse to the ground. Never before had the greenskins seen such graceful architecture of slender columns curving artfully to support buildings that had stood for thousands of years. The greatest artisans of the elves had produced peerless sculptures, fountains, and open plazas of much wonderment. Yet all the greenskins cared for was the anarchy that their assault was causing. Cackling as the flames went higher, mobs of greenskins paused to rip arms off of statues, torment injured elves, or barbarically smash signs of civilization. Even as they defended their ruined city, elves wept at the unrecoverable and senseless loss of so much that was beautiful and fair. The island itself shuddered, burying many elves and goblins in the ruins. Ulthuan was convulsing. no longer protected by the standing stones against the swirling vortex of the chaos power. Blacktooth directed his wyvern to fly directly towards the battlements of the Warden's Tower. Although he was mad with power, the old shaman knew that with another fallen keystone, the entire island would sink. He would soon bathe in an aura of power and unleash an era of slaughter upon the world. Yet before Blacktooth could reach his destination atop the monolith or unleash his vast reserves of arcane power, a new force swept into the raging battle. Down from the skies hurtled Eltharion, an elven captain of much renown. He rode upon his griffin, and vengeance was in his eyes. As a magical storm broke and multicolored lightning strikes split the strangely hued skies, Eltharion beheaded Blacktooth with a single sword stroke. Far below, Eltharion's battle-hardened elf reinforcements swept into the ruined city to face Grom and drive back his hordes. While Eltharion and a handful of mages attempted to calm the seething storm and prevent its catastrophic consequences, the battle in the ruined city reached a crescendo. Desperately outnumbered, the elves had been slowly pressed backwards through the ruined streets. The timely arrival of Eltharion's veteran warriors stemmed the green tide, and soon the attackers were being driven back. Losing all confidence, the goblins suddenly routed en masse. With the death of their chief sorcerer, the arrival of fresh elven troops, and a natural storm raging above, it is no wonder many goblins lost heart and broke. For a time, Grom attempted to rally his fleeing troops, but finally, he too fled the city amongst the final collapse of its last towers. No one is sure what happened to Grom in the wake of that conflict. The elves never caught him, and some say he resides there still, high up in the magic-tainted mountains of the strange land. Others say he flew off, mounted atop his mad shaman's wyvern, but is still seeking new lands worthy of conquest. No one knows for sure, but back in the Badlands, rumors persist that one day, Grom's corpulent majesty will return once more to lead them to victory. Thanks for tuning in. This has been A History with Grom. If you liked it, be sure to drop a like, share, subscribe, tell a friend. Anyways, I'm off to work now because YouTube doesn't pay my bills. I see hordes of green, red blood too. I see the doom for me and you. And I think to myself, what a wonderful walk.